to bring on Tawney as warm welcome.
The only proper response that we have, I think, before our Lord at times is one of gratitude. And I'm certainly so gracious to be here. So thank you so much, Bishop, for the invitation to be here. I'm very excited to be talking. Mathematics is my background, but today we're going to just be a little bit more general, and I'd love to talk to you a little bit about the vocation of a teacher. Let's talk about what that means, right? And so I thought long and hard about where to start with this. Where do we start when trying to understand what it means to be a teacher? And I think we start with Christ. Sound good? Yeah?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Sound good?
Yes.
This is good. All right. Here we go. Because Jesus Christ fully reveals man to himself. One of Pope John Paul II's favorite quotes out of the Second Vatican Council comes from Gaudium et Spes, which says that the truth is that only in the mystery of the incarnate Word does the mystery of man take on light. For Adam, the first man, was a figure of him who was to come, namely Christ the Lord. Christ, the final Adam, by revelation of the mystery of the Father and his love, fully reveals man to himself and makes his supreme calling clear. Teachers, you have been called. And as called, you have been called to model Christ. So what it means to be fully human can only be found in our Lord, and therefore what it means to be teacher can only be found in our Lord. So that's where we start. We start with Jesus. But if we really want to try to understand the nature of a teacher, we have to think about what a teacher does. So what is the nature of education itself? Sometimes the modern world would have us believe that the proper end of education is the formation of an economic workforce, right? The preparation for students so that they can ultimately get a good job. Now, trust me, I got 8 kids. So I'm very interested in my children becoming employed someday. And so I'm not dismissing that that's a part of what happens. I mean, after all, we are called to work, right? We have our proper vocations, whether it's to religious life or to marriage, but we also have our work vocations, right? So work is part of what it means to be human, but surely that can't be the whole of it. The proper end of education cannot solely be dedicated to just the formation of an economic workforce. No, our calling is higher than that. The proper education is the formation of the human person. That's what we do as teachers. Sister Miriam Joseph, in her monumental book on the Trivium, says that education is the highest of arts in the sense that it imposes form, ideas and ideals, not on matter as do the other arts, but on the mind. As teachers, we form students' souls. And the goal of an education is to help students to become morally, intellectually, and aesthetically alive. That this is why when you walk into a school, the first thing you should notice is joy. Yes, ordered joy, right? We like having order in our schools, but certainly there's a form of order that a dictator might have. That's not the kind of order that we want in our schools. What we want is an ordered joy. We want students to be alive, morally, intellectually, and aesthetically. We want them to know the truth, to act well, to pursue and do the good, and to develop a palate for beauty. But more than that, understand that those 3 transcendentals, truth, goodness, and beauty, they find their unity in heaven. The 3 transcendentals are what philosophers would say are convertible with one another, right? Something is beautiful insofar as it discloses the truth, right? To act well, to pursue the good, is also to pursue things that are true. But the 3 transcendentals point towards a unity that can only be found in God. And so yes, the proper end of an education is the formation of students to make them morally, intellectually, and aesthetically alive, but ultimately what that points to is heaven. And so we come back to Jesus. It is not too much to say that you have a pivotal role, along with pastors and parents, in helping students to become who they are supposed to be. And who they are supposed to be is ultimately their heavenly destiny. When we get to heaven, God willing, we will be the perfect versions of ourselves. That's what we're trying to do in the classroom. We're trying to lead them to Jesus. Now, that being said, I already mentioned pastors and parents. There are other people in the lives of students that are helping to craft students' souls. Because that's what you are, teachers. You are soul crafters. You have more in common with the master builders of the cathedrals of old than you do with the modern data scientist. And I will say that unapologetically. Yes, teachers collect data. Every time you give a quiz, you collect data, and hopefully you're looking at that and responding to that. But that is not the essence of what you do. The essence of what you do is a soul crafter. So I really do mean it when I say you have more in common with the master builders that constructed the grand cathedrals than the modern data analysts or the data scientists. You are helping students to form their souls, whereas the master builders were helping to form cathedrals. The other thing you have in common with those, by the way, is that they had a guild of sorts. The single best professional development for any teacher is to sit at the feet of a master who's been teaching for 20, 25, 30, last year we heard people teaching for 40 years. You sit at the feet of a master and you learn what it means to educate. Because as a craftsman, you learn your craft from others, those who have gone before you. So you are soul crafters, but so too are pastors and parents. And so it would be interesting for us to think about what it is that a teacher has that's unique from the pastors and parents. How is it that we craft the souls, right? I mean, surely we all believe that we are charged with these students for a certain number of hours a day, and we want to help them to become morally good. But the core of what a teacher does is in the instruction, is in the classroom. And so that's actually what makes, I think, the teacher's call to soul crafting unique. It happens in that interaction between teachers, students, and content. I mean, I hate to state the obvious, but sometimes good philosophy is just stating things that are obviously true. But what is education? It is a teacher teaching content to a student. Like, that's what it is. Now, it's also, the Latin word for education is educare, meaning to lead out. It's the teacher's job to lead the students beyond themselves into the grander reality of God's creation. All content is a study of being, whether it's mathematical being, mathematical reality, scientific being, literary being, theological being. Everything that we give students is being itself, which means that content is remarkable. It's astounding because it comes from God and it ultimately points back to God. That's what a teacher gives to a student. So this is the education act. A teacher leading a student out of themselves, beyond themselves, through the content. Make sense? So that forms sort of the core of what I want to cover in the next 4 hours. That's what we agreed to, right? About 4, okay. I want to go through each of these, but I'm going to go through them in reverse. I'm going to start with the content. You must love your content. Period. And elementary teachers, you are my heroes because you have it all. You have all the content. And you must love it down to its minute detail. And I'm here to tell you that that's possible. It's possible to love every bit of what you teach. It has to be. If content is ultimately about God, if it's ultimately about being itself, then it has to be interesting. So everything that we teach has something that's phenomenal and interesting about it, and you must learn to love that. One of my favorite interview questions to ask teachers when we're seeking to hire them is, especially if they're right out of college, like, look, you have a degree in biology. Can you give me something from the last 4 years in your studies that you think is amazing, and you tell me why it's amazing? It's a little depressing. Sometimes people struggle with this. I want a teacher to be able to bring content alive. And in order to do that, you have to love it. And students deserve that. Students deserve to have that enthusiasm and that love communicated in everything that we teach. Because enthusiasm and love is inherently contagious, right? This is not to suggest that the classroom is about entertainment, but it is to suggest that if you think about the classes that you learn the most in, the classes that you enjoy, that you ultimately enjoyed them, right? You enjoyed that teacher because that content came alive. And students deserve to be given the best. Everything that you teach is part of the great conversation of history. Whether it's literature, the greatest that's been written, whether it's math, the greatest that's been posited and proven, or science, the greatest that's been discovered, or certainly the fine arts through singing and painting and dramatizing. It's all part of the great conversation of those that have come before us. And you have to believe, teachers, deep down, so deep in your souls, you have to believe that your discipline satisfies something unique in the human soul that can only be satisfied by that discipline. This is what I believe about math. It satisfies something unique in the human soul that can only be satisfied by thinking mathematically. And the audacious thing about that is I actually believe it. Which means, like, if you don't learn to think mathematically, there's something missing. You do know God's a mathematician, right? Right? Okay. But you must believe that about your discipline as well. And you must fundamentally, in that moment, believe that your subject, nay, not just your subject, but the topic of the day is the most important thing for students to know. I once was on a panel and a teacher raised her hand and said, I really appreciate your enthusiasm and your hand motions. And I didn't understand that because I'm just super calm. But I listened to the question. She said, how do you make the content come alive? And I asked the teacher, what are you teaching like right now? And she was a literature and composition teacher, and she was teaching Beowulf. And I thought, well, shoot, this is super easy, right? I said, look, you have to understand that right now, today, in this lesson, Beowulf is the most important thing that students need. You have to be so convicted about that they feel that and they sense that enthusiasm. And then, by the way, you need to sense no contradiction a month from now when it's a Christmas carol. And you're like, no, that's the most important thing. That's what they need. You have to believe this about your content. You have to. For me, my first love is math. Sorry, my first love is my wife. There's temporal order and there's another kind of order. So temporally, I met math before my wife. So in that way, this is my first love, right? So I'm going to take a shot at this. I'm going to try to convince you that math is the most important thing that we study. And in fact, I'm going to talk about prime numbers a little bit. Okay, so buckle up. I know, I see there's a little bit of like sweaty palms and like, wait, I want to do math in this talk? We're just going to do a little bit, okay? Look, I believe that math is the most important thing we study. Here's my argument. In mathematics, students come into an encounter with objective truth in a way that is far more obvious than other disciplines, right? For example, the question of whether Robin Hood is an antagonist or a protagonist is a difficult question for young students. This is not to say relative. It's not what I mean. But I do mean that it's a difficult question. But in math, when you learn something true, when you learn that multiplication is commutative, that it doesn't matter what order you multiply numbers in, you are learning something that was true before you were born and will be true long after you are dead, so that someday it can be written on your tombstone, this person knew the commutative property of multiplication. And so what that means is the truth that students learn in math is not merely objective, but it's eternal. There are truths that are objective but not eternal. For example, my reading glasses have a prescription of, I think, 1 1/4. That's an objective truth. I assure you that is not an eternal truth. I think right now they actually need to be strengthened. As I get older, that's what's going to happen. But the mathematical truths are true eternally. You can see where I'm going with this. In a world that has long ago relativized beauty as in the eye of the beholder, that has rapidly tried to convince us that goodness is relative, truth in culture is losing its stronghold as well. And mathematics holds on to this and says, no, there are things that are true and they will be true long after you are dead. But what's more than that, think about this, the truths of mathematics are in things not made of matter. for you have never seen a perfect triangle. Not once. You cannot draw one. You cannot even construct one in this material world. It will always have imperfections, or moreover, a triangle has no height. It's a completely flat shape. You couldn't actually have this in the material world. It is an immaterial object, and yet we can say true things about it. Now you tell me, Catholic school teachers, if a discipline that immediately convinces students that there's objective, eternal truth and things not in the material world is not an important lesson for students. Right? I think math is the most important thing that we give to students in that way. That's my argument. Notice that what I didn't say is that we teach math because it's useful. It is. Math is useful. It's amazing. I mean, but that shouldn't surprise us, because if math is the language of the universe, then those immaterial ideals are incarnated down here. So we find approximations of triangles. We find the truths of mathematics built into the universe, and in this way, math uniquely bridges heaven and earth. The material world speaks of math, but it speaks by pointing our eyes and our thoughts and our minds upwards. And that's absolutely amazing. We don't study math because it's useful, even though it is. We study it because there's something unique in our souls that can only be satisfied by thinking mathematically. But more than that, let's talk about prime numbers for a little bit. That's not a prime number. Prime numbers are almost always, I wouldn't say misdefined. They might be mystifying, but they're not misdefined. But the way that they're defined has something to do with, a number that's only divisible by itself and 1, except for 1 itself. 1's not a prime. We'll get to that later. That's not the essence of a prime. The essence of a prime is the basic building blocks of numbers. Right? And so actually, basic building blocks of multiplication. So actually, I want to start with addition. I want to convince you that primes are interesting by looking at addition. If I try to build out an addition tree or try to break down a number into addition facts, it's kind of boring. I only get ones. No matter what number you start with, if you try to break it down with addition, 6 is 2 plus 4, let's break down 2, let's break down 4, you will only ever end up with ones. That's it. The basic building blocks of addition, there's only one of them. But in multiplication, even starting with the number 240, all of a sudden we have at least 3 primes. Like, that's already interesting. In addition, there was only 1, and now we have the number 2, the number 3, and the number 5, and they can't be broken down anymore. Yeah, I mean, you can do 5 as 1 and 5, but that's not breaking down, right? Right? So, there's already 3. And so now we start to ask ourselves, are those the only 3? I wonder how many there are. Now, this is an old truth. Euclid knew there were an infinite number of them, and he proved that. Whoa! Math is now giving us insight into infinity itself. There's only one basic building block of addition, but there's an infinite number of basic building blocks of primes, or of multiplication. But as much as we know about them, there are things we don't know. For example, there's this concept called twin primes, which is numbers that are 2 apart. Just somebody shout it out. Give me a twin prime pair, 2 primes that are 2 apart. I heard 5 and 7, I heard 3 and 5, I hear lots of them coming out. 3 and 5, 17, 19, right? There's an infinite number of primes. Are there an infinite number of twin prime pairs? And the answer is, we don't know. This is an unsolved problem in math. Like, we have to give students this. We have to tell them there are things in math we don't know. Of course, because truth is a mystery. And not a mystery in the sense of a mystery novel or a murder mystery to be solved and exhausted. But also not a mystery meaning we can't really understand it, you just have to accept it. No. We can come to know things, but I guess it's trite, but as the old adage goes, the more you know, the more there is to know. The more you know, you don't know, right? There are unsolved problems in math. That's incredible. That's such a simple question. And the best mathematicians in the history of the world have not been able to answer this. We've not found an end to them. We seem to keep finding them, but we have no idea if they stop at some point. Okay. Now, lest you think I'm biased, because I'm up here saying math's the most important thing we study. Remember, my charge is you have to do this for every discipline. So if you'll bear with me for a little bit, I'd like to take a crack at literature. I think literature is the most important thing that we give to our kids. The single most important thing. Because in literature, and I have two arguments for this. One is, this is where students learn about human nature in a fictional world. And that world can bend a lot of things. It can be fantastical, like the world of Narnia. But the thing that it doesn't bend, at least good literature, is human nature. Because that's what literature is about. It's about disclosing what it means to be human to students in this fictional world that is intentionally separated off from us. Whether it's as fantastical as Narnia or as very real as Anna Karenina. Right? And it's through that, through story, that we learn what it means to be human. We watch the actions of characters play out. And we learn the consequences of vice, the rewards of virtue. You want a whole talk on Anna Karenina? That's the first book that told me there are great books. We could do a whole talk on that. Right? But especially for young kids, there's a particular grammar of the story, particularly in fairy tales, by the way. And there's a way in which those fairy tales, in their disclosure of the good and the evil. I mean, have you ever heard this critique of children's literature that somehow it's just not real? Because good and evil, as Solzhenitsyn said, that line goes through every human heart. So you don't have characters that are purely good or purely evil. Right. But in the ultimate reality, in a non-flawed world, there is a stark contrast between good and evil, and young kids learn that in their study of particularly fairy tales, but also most of good literature. But more than that, so not only is literature the most important things that students study, I think Moby Dick is the most important novel kids can read. You don't believe me. Here's why. I have two reasons for this. One is its artistic merit. Somebody just give me a little bit, what's Ahab's most prominent physical trait? He's got a peg leg. Okay, so Ahab's the captain of a ship, he's got a peg leg. I want you to listen to this. Coming off camera. And had you watched Ahab's face that night, you would have thought that in him also two different things were warring. While his one live leg made lively echoes along the deck, every stroke of his dead limbs sounded like a coffin tap. On life and death this old man walked. But though the ship so swiftly sped, and though from every eye like arrows the eager glances shot, yet the silvery jet was no more seen that night. Every sailor swore he saw it once, but not a second time. You almost have to read it out loud to see it. Melville is a poet. Nobody speaks sound like Melville except maybe Hopkins. Listen to the middle of this. Can you hear Ahab walking across the deck? Melville writes in iambic, on life and death this old man walked. But though the ship so swiftly sped, and though from every eye like arrows, and even when the iambic pauses, you can hear Ahab stop. The eager glances shot. I think the kids need to read this book because it demonstrates that good literature is not just about a good story, but it's also about its artistic merit. It's about good and beautiful prose. God, after all, reveals himself as word. That's one argument. My second argument is this. All teachers should read this book. Do you know what Moby Dick's really about? Do you know why Melville wrote this? You might say this is man versus nature. This is the mutual respect, even in their hunt for each other, that Ahab and the whale have for each other. That's not why Melville wrote this. He wrote this book because that dude loves whales. No, I'm not kidding. Like, if you've read this book, there are entire chapters just on whale art. That dude loves whales, and he loves whaling, and he wants you to love whales, and he wants you to love whaling, and by the end of that book, you're ready to get on a whale ship. The reason you should read this book, the reason this is the most important book, is that someday, God willing, you will be in heaven, and you will run into a whaler, and you're like, I get you. That's why you read this book. Okay, That was 9:37. That was a lot of time. So that was on content. You have to love your content. You have to be convinced it's the most important thing, but you also have to love students, which is why after asking teachers in an interview, what's something from your discipline that amazes you, I then ask, but why do you want to teach? You could do lots of stuff with that content. Why do you want to teach? Because we want to think about how they view working with students. You must love your students as unique and unrepeatable. You have to meet them for who they are, right there, right now, with a dignity that is beyond compare. Every student that comes through your classroom, whether it's that kid that's like, I know the answer, me, or the quiet kid in the background. My brother has Down syndrome, whether it's the kid with Down syndrome, the kid for whom things come really easy, for whom they struggle, the kid for whom math is really easy, but they just are really struggling in art class. All of them have a unique dignity beyond compare. Your call is to be with them. You must encounter them, because if you do not have an encounter with that individual, they will not be able to have an encounter with the content that you so desperately want to give them. So yes, you must love your content, but you must love your kids too. Some of you may be familiar with Plato's allegory of the cave. And a lot of times, and this is right, this is not wrong, we talk about what it means for sort of us as an individual to look at the shadows on the cave. So what we're seeing real things, but not the whole of them, right? We're seeing the shadows that they cast and trying to understand reality. And we think about it from our perspective, almost like from our perspective as a student. What people forget about the allegory of the cave is as we start to learn those shadows and start to ascend out of the cave and see reality bathed in light, Plato says you must then go back down into the cave and become accustomed to those shadows once again so that you can help lead others out. You must, as an expert in your content, you must descend back down into the cave, into the student confusion, so that you can then lead them out. Because it is in the moment of student confusion that an instructor becomes a teacher. Anybody can instruct. Like what I'm doing up here, this is easy. I just get to listen to myself talk and laugh at my own jokes. What you do in the classrooms is not instruction, it is teaching. And that teaching happens precisely in the moment of student confusion. So that allegory of the cave, yes, calls us to learn our content, to come out of this and see not just shadows, but reality bathed in light. But we go back down as teachers. As teachers, we are called to have our minds in the highest things, but to be working down here with students. And so you must love them. So the misguided way comes from another one of my favorite books, Hard Times by Charles Dickens, where he presents this delightfully horrific teacher, Mr. Gradgrind. And the only background I'll give you to this is that Sissy Jupe, a student in the class, her family works with horses. That's what they do. She has known horses her whole life. Give me your definition of a horse. Sissy Jupe, thrown into the greatest alarm by this demand. Girl number 20. I hope we don't refer to our students as numbers. Girl number 20, unable to define a horse, said Mr. Gradgrind, for the general behoof of all the little pitchers. The behoof. There's nobody better than Dickens at the pun. Girl number 20, possessed of no facts in reference to one of the commonest animals. Bitzer, said Thomas Gradgrind, you define a horse. Quadruped. Gramnivorous, 40 teeth, namely 24 grinders, 4 eye teeth, and 12 incisive. Sheds coat in the spring. In marshy countries, sheds hoofs too. Hoofs hard, but requiring to be shod with iron. Age known by marks in mouth. Ah, now, girl number 20, said Mr. Gradgrind. Now you know what a horse is. This is a student who grew up with horses. She knows what a horse is. Bishop Flores from Brownsville, maybe about a year ago, had a delightful piece called The Synthetic Impulse in Catholic Education. And he makes a distinction between the analytical and the synthetic. The analytical, which is all very good, is breaking things down, like trying to understand the pieces, right? And this is a kind of an analytical definition that Mr. Bitzer gives to his teacher. But what Flores is calling us to is a much more synthetic view where we start to understand meaning. Sissy Jupe has meaning in that horse. But this has impact on the way that we teach. We need students, if we are to love them, we have to encounter them, but we have to provide them with an encounter of the content. Jack Barzoon in Teacher of America says, "How then do you pour a little bit of what you feel and think into another's mind? In the act of teaching, it is done by raising the ghost of an object, idea, or fact, and holding it in full view of the class, turning it this way and that, describing it. The public has an excellent name for this, making the subject come to life. The student must see the points, must recreate Lincoln, must feel like Wordsworth at Tintern Abbey, must visualize the pressure of the atmosphere on a column of mercury. We must give students an encounter with the whole. This is why science teachers, I believe that we should always start with the big before breaking it down to the small. Most science textbooks start with cells and build up. Biology textbooks start with cells and bring it up from there. Or in chemistry, start with the atoms and the molecules and bring it up. We should start with the things observable because that's where we find meaning. And then yes, then we break it down and understand their parts. That's what good pedagogy is. This is not a full plan for writing a lesson plan. But if I'm writing a lesson plan, the first thing I'm doing is, what is the real thing students are encountering? What is the being? What is that thing we want them to know about, and how do we bring it to life? And this is not cheap entertainment. Trust me, prime numbers are perfectly interesting in and of themselves. We do not need to have kids make board games to answer questions about primes in order to make it interesting. We don't. That is to suggest somehow that they're not interesting in and of themselves, and they need to be placed into some kind of entertainment structure. Everything we study is fascinating and interesting. What is it that makes it interesting? What is it that brings it to life? And look, it's okay. It's totally okay if you're a teacher and you're sitting there, look, today I'm teaching, the respiratory system, or I'm teaching the slope-intercept form of a line, and I just don't know what makes this interesting. I'm not sure why we're doing this. Talk about it with colleagues. If it's math, call me. Give yourself an hour, but call me. Like, you just talk to one another because it's all amazing. And then we use Socratic questioning to bring that truth to life. It is an absolute marvel to be in the classroom of a master Socratic teacher who speaks almost the entire time in questions, giving the students only so much so that the student feels like they discovered the truth on their own. And yet, it's not from the ground up in this massively inefficient way. Right? As if like we're just rediscovering everything. No, that conversation is guided. It doesn't it wanders, but it doesn't meander. You let it go a little bit off this way, but you always have a trajectory you're on. Whether you're talking about a great novel or a scientific phenomenon or a math problem, what is the thing that you're studying? How do you bring it to life? And how do you engage in questions in drawing that out? That's a whole nother seminar. How to ask good questions and to draw out the truth of what you're studying. You're doing well, 9:45. So, you gotta love your content, you gotta love your students. You have to love yourself. And I mean that in the best of ways, right? This is not a vanity, right? You have to love yourself as Jesus Christ loves you. Because you can only give what you first receive, and you can only teach from who you are. You cannot spread that awe and wonder if you don't have it, but you also can only teach from the person that you are. What you do on the evenings and on Saturday and Sunday comes into the classroom. Everything that you do forms who you are, and who you are comes into the classroom. And so teachers, we must take our own formation seriously. And we, as human beings made in the image and likeness of God, we need to make sure that we are forming our bodily existence, our mind, our intellect, and our soul. Bear with me on these categories, but because we're body, soul, unity, so they all overlap. So it's a helpful structure to keep in mind, but they do all overlap. So we have to form our bodies. Now here, the thing that I'll note is, I'm a huge fan of establishing a life of discipline. That's the first thing. Order in our lives is good. I heard a priest give a homily one time. It was just really phenomenal. When he said, when he first started discerning the priesthood, the priest from the diocesan office who's in charge of vocation says, tell me about your prayer life. And this particular priest who was, just out of college, said something like, well, I, say the rosary on occasion, I go to mass, and just started kind of rattling through things. And the formator said, look, all of that is good, but you need a prayer life. And what he meant was a disciplined prayer life. What is the order of your day? Right? This is not to mean that it's so rigid that it doesn't have flexibility, but order in our life is good. We become great at things if we have the right structures and order. But number two, and I guess related, but maybe quite different from that, my advice is, in a world that is retreating rapidly into the virtual, live in the real world. Do real things. Go garden. Go build something. He's now a senior, but back when he was a freshman, my boy, his name's Benedict. He'll probably be the only one that didn't go to Benedictine, because it's like a little on the nose, right? But anyway, so he was a freshman. We had this antique hutch that in one way was beautiful, but for years it had had this hideous yellow paint job on it. And we were done with it. It had gone from one room to the next, and I was trying to sell it, I was trying to give it away, and at one point I said, I'm just gonna take it, I'm just gonna donate it. And Benedict said, well, wait, can I try to strip the paint off of it? I'm like, well, yeah. You should do that. And that kid worked for 14 months, here and there in the garage, getting the paint off of it, sanding it down, bringing it back to life, and it's gorgeous. It, of course, is now back in the house, right? Do real things. Challenge your students to do real things, right? That's the body. These are just some thoughts. This is not a full program. You have to train your mind. And here I do like Bishop Flores' distinction between the analytical and the synthetic. Again, some of this starts to overlap, but for the analytical, read books that educate you in the truths of the faith, whether it's philosophy or theology, or just books that are generally catechetical, right? Know your faith. Study your discipline. How much do you if you're a science teacher, how much new science do you try to learn every year? Right? If you're a math teacher, how much new math do you... There's a book out there that can help you learn a little new math. Study your discipline, but study other things. This education is for you. Do we have calculus teachers at all? So I see a few hands. Calculus, I'm not picking on you particularly, but it's a great example. Calculus teachers, if you've never read Charlotte's Web, go read it. Study other disciplines. Learn more. And when you study other disciplines, and in particular when you read literature, that starts to help you construct meaning in the universe. Because if our world is retreating into the virtual, it's also retreating into the specialized. And we need to be able to construct meaning in the universe, and you do that through a wide swath of kinds of knowledge. But perhaps most importantly, take care of your soul. Now again, this is related to the body, what I put up there about establishing a life of discipline, but receive the sacraments. Just like Mother Teresa said, we really can't go into other countries and work with the poor if we cannot receive the Eucharist. It's very difficult to show up every day and work with students if we do not have the life of Jesus in us. Receive the sacraments as often as you can. Develop a sacramental life so that you can develop a sacramental vision. Primarily, it's the grace that we receive, but there is a subtle lesson in receiving the sacraments that the physical reveals and communicates the eternal. And that is true in a distinct way, right? The sacraments have a capital S, but there's a way in which all your content is lowercase s sacramental. Because the world of being cries out to the one being. So when we receive the sacraments, we get this subtle formation in that way. And pray, I put regularly there, that's wrong. Pray ceaselessly. Pray so often that everything you do is a prayer. And so we come full circle. Teachers, if you take one thing away from this, it's that you are not a data scientist. You are a soul crafter, and that is a noble career. You need to understand that every discipline satisfies something unique in the human soul that can only be satisfied that way, and it forms us into being human, and it points us to Jesus. And so you and your students must thirst for wonder. You must wonder about things. And here, we should understand that wonder is a choice. And look, if you were here last night, you heard me say this. I'm from Arizona, right? So I've been to the Grand Canyon. I understand those moments when wonder seems to happen to us. I get that. those are extraordinary ways. The ordinary way that wonder works is that we choose. So if there's something you don't find interesting in what you're teaching, ask yourself, what is wonderful about this? Choose to wonder so your students can choose to wonder. This is like love in this way, right? Love is also a choice. I love my wife insofar as I wake up every morning and choose to love her. And it's related to wonder, right? I love my wife insofar as I stand in great awe and wonder of her. And I know she feels the same about me, because she says all the time, Jake, I often wonder about you. I want to end here. We started with John Paul II in a document, for the Latinists among you, that had the word joy in it. We end with Pope Benedict with another document also having, I'm sorry, it did have joy, I meant hope. Both documents have the word hope in them. From Spe Salvi, Pope Benedict. Man was created for greatness, for God himself. He was created to be filled by God, but his heart is too small for the greatness to which it is destined. It must be stretched. Teachers, you have chosen the noblest of all careers. You are called to greatness. Allow your hearts to be stretched so that Jesus can fill them up, so that you have everything you need by the grace of God to take care of those souls that come in and out of your classrooms every year. On behalf of myself as a parent, of the parents of the kids that you educate, thank you for what you do. You are amazing. You are amazing. You are amazing. Thank you.